any questions throughout our virtual event, you can always connect with us through the Help tab, and our client services team is working diligently on the back end to make your virtual event experience run smoothly. So now we will kick off this assembly. I am very excited to announce our opening keynote speaker. He's the former CISO of the Central Intelligence Agency, Bob Bigman. Bob spent 30 years at the CIA developing technical measures and procedures to manage the nation's most sensitive secrets. He is now an independent consultant and works with the US government, foreign governments, and the top 50 Fortune corporations. We will definitely want to do some Q&A at the end of this keynote. So if you want to submit a question to Bob, we're going to be using the chat function in the event portal. So start to ask your questions there, and we'll get to it at the end of the session. So Bob, I'm going to pass it on to you and let you take it from here.
Kara, thank you very much. And when Kara says submit questions, he means submit questions on cybersecurity. We won't be answering the Oswald question. Now, thank you very much. In the half hour that I have to speak with you this morning, I thought a good topic would be what I've been seeing out there since I've retired, and I've done about 63, 64 different assessments of big companies, small governments, big governments, small companies, medium-sized companies, and there's certain elements of their cybersecurity approach or program that I find pretty much common to all of them, regardless, of their size, that I think are problems. Really inhibit their ability to implement a good, solid cybersecurity program. And I'm not sure what the reason is why they don't do these things. To me, it seems rather obvious. And if any of you worked in the government space for any length of time, these are all kind of key requirements. But I don't see these characteristics even in some foreign governments, and I certainly don't see them in most, if not all, of the private industry I've worked with since I've retired. So I want to talk about some of those, and at the end, obviously, please ask questions about this or any other aspect of cybersecurity. Feel free. So let me jump into it. The first three I want to talk about are not technical, don't cost a lot of money, even a penny, and are something you can start doing even tomorrow. And I think they would go a long way in reducing your risk and improving your cybersecurity program. So the first one is have a written charter. And what I mean by that is I go into many private companies and we'll be talking various cybersecurity issues. And what will commonly come up almost every time is a discussion, not necessarily on the technical merits of the technology or the product, is who does it? Do we do it? Does the business element do it? Does the IT organization do it? Who's responsible for doing it? What would be the handoffs and how would it work? And to me, I'm thinking time and time again, this business has been going on for years and years and years, and you're still discussing who's got what responsibilities for cybersecurity. And even in some of the government agencies I work with, they're having discussions regarding, whether we buy the technology, who implements the technology, or who's responsible for this policy or that policy. To me, it's a great waste of time. And it results in inefficient cybersecurity delivery. It results in lack of resource commitments. It's very difficult. So what I suggest to all my clients is you have to first document what it is your cybersecurity program is doing, what you're going to do, what you're doing now, and what you plan to do. And that shouldn't be a secret. You don't need to hide that from everyone, because the charter really defines your program and tells everyone, your business organizations and your IT organization, what you're responsible for. For example, do you do the firewalls or do they do the firewalls? Who writes the rules? Who does the audits? Who does the assessments? And all these should be not just talked about as oral history. They should be documented and part of a thing called a charter. It's not just important to say what you are doing. As a result, it's important to also note what you're not doing. So the IT organization will have some idea what their responsibilities are. The business elements will know what parts of the responsibility for application security they have. I went into one organization about a month ago, and the argument was over how they do the application security scanning and who does it. And what I realized is they had both gone out and bought different tools to do their application security without even meeting with each other to talk about, how this was going to be done and who does it. And it was obviously a great waste of money. These tools are, as you all know, not very expensive, are very expensive. So anyways, number one, charter. You do have to have a charter. Number two, governance. As big as number one, I'm shocked to see in almost every of the 60 odd companies I've been with in agencies, they have no cybersecurity, no effective cybersecurity governance. Some have governance, but it's this kind of risk management decision-making thing idea, frankly, doesn't even make any sense. When I say cybersecurity governance, I mean a relationship, continual relationship between the IT organization, the cyber organization, and the customers, working together on a monthly or even a weekly basis to talk about cybersecurity. What are the hot issues? What new things are being planned? What new procurements are being considered? So there's some notion of security being integrated into everything that's going on in the IT organization, as well as into the business organization. So again, time and time I go into a company, I talk to the CISO or someone in security, and they're telling about how they're always surprised by what the organization's doing, including some shocking revelations like, we didn't know that this organization was moving to AWS. I'm like dumbfounded. Or, we didn't know that this organization was allowing their employees to use their home PCs. This is not the way to run a railroad. I mean, this is where security risk arrive. You have to have a continual and iterative relationship where you talk to the key business partners and the IT organizations, and security is part of that fabric that enables them to do their job better because they meet with you and they see you and they work together. I can't tell you the number of organizations I work with where security is this sometimes physically and often logically siloed organization who tosses a policy over the wall every once in a while or does a scan every once in a while. But other than that, they're pretty much sight unseen to the organization. That's high risk. Number three, also not very expensive, nor resource driven, is most organizations make up policy as they go along. Let's face it. Again, I don't understand how someone can run a railroad that way. It's, to me, from my perspective, cybersecurity is the one program that can most take advantage of what I call policy-driven management. It's absolutely critical, just like it is to have a charter, just like it is to have a governance program, that your policies be documented and be written and be available to all those who need them, who are implementing your program or who are users of your program, to understand what their requirements are for cybersecurity. And there's a collection of like 11 standard policies I recommend all organizations have. But the notion is that they've all key policy decisions, from passwords to work at home to firewall management, they all got to be, I'm a big fan of, writing things down and document them. So people don't have to consistently call you on the phone and ask you the same question 1,000 times. You can use the policies. You can use a policy from an auditing perspective. You can use the policies from a guidance perspective, from a procurement security perspective. Documenting what your requirements are go a long way in securing your systems. And as I said, these first three, you can go out and start doing tomorrow. They don't cost you any money. You don't have to go out and buy, and thank God you don't have to deal with any vendors. You can just start doing it. All right, so let me now talk to some of the technical things I see that seem to go wrong in probably, again, all 60, maybe 90% of them. Number one, they do a very poor job of privileged account management. If you talk to some of the hackers, and I've talked to a few, the main reason when they drop a payload onto your network, they have one intention, and you can basically understand this by looking at what their reconnaissance tools do. Other than looking for configuration information, the very first thing they do is they want to look for privileged credentials and cache. That's their number one target. Your job has to be to not make it very, very hard for them to be able to do that. Again, most organizations don't do that well at all. Some have deployed tools, your CyberArks, Beyond Trust, but haven't done it completely. Still leave processes, privileged processes, which also have credential tokens with them, running in memory forever with either none, no, or weak passwords. If you can do one thing and do your privileged credential management right, and make them very difficult to steal, even someone dropping, even the most recent ransomware attacks on your network is going to make it very, very hard for them to exploit vulnerabilities unless they're able to run them with privileges. I just can't tell you the number of incidents I've been involved in where when we look back to see, all right, so what was the cause? The cause wasn't necessarily they didn't see the payload being dropped. The antivirus products, the intrusion detections are only as good as they are. The bad guys are dropping zero payloads these days, where before we saw maybe 1 or 2 a year, then 5 or 6 a year. Now it's up to 40, 50 a year. So chances are, if you're a target, they may drop one on you. Your antivirus, anti-malware products are not going to detect those. You need other protection mechanisms. So the first one you need, as I said before, is you need some way to better secure privileged credentials. Now you have to also secure all credentials, user credentials as well, but most importantly, especially in a Windows environment, it's crucial that you protect privileged credentials and make them hard to exploit. The second thing you have to do is, especially today, where, as I said before, the attacks are becoming more sophisticated, are becoming more democratized in the sense that you're seeing them used by increasing numbers of groups working together, sharing payloads, especially from Russia and now China. You need to do better than antivirus. Probably not a surprise to you, but what is a surprise is how many companies I go into, and their number one mechanism to protect their servers, and these are big business servers providing transactions, funds transfers, Swift transfer support, usually on big Linux boxes. And I just got through working on an incident with a company last month on this. And the number one question I asked was, what were you doing to secure the server? Well, the best thing they had was an antivirus product, which was signature-based. It was up to date with its signatures, okay, but it certainly didn't detect the payload. You have to now think about moving beyond antivirus. And by the way, you should have been thinking of this, maybe a couple of years ago, into real memory protection. For the Windows environment, specifically Windows 10 and the later editions now of Windows Server, it means you have to implement virtualization-based security. Microsoft, when you talk to them privately, will tell you that if you want to really take advantage of Defender and Credential Guard, the best way to do it and to secure it from sophisticated hacking is to use virtualization security, where you can enable a root of trust all the way from the boot of the TPM chip through the virtualization layer, and to secure the operating system, the kernel and Windows, the DLLs, with a level of security that does increase the workload of the hackers. And by the way, stops probably 95% of your ransomware gangs. In the Linux environment, also you got to do a lot more. In fact, in this last one I was just referring to, as I said, they had a Linux security product, antivirus product, but it was unable to detect the misuse. They weren't using SE Linux. They are now, by the way. They weren't even using AppArmor. They had no real memory execution prevention techniques, malware execution detection techniques on the host. And it was a pretty sad state of affairs. So if you're thinking that you can rely solely on, especially on your servers, on malware protection, and even secure configuration settings, which are important, no, you have to now think beyond that. Okay, moving on. I mentioned Windows 10. I have a couple of friends at Microsoft who work in security architecture and help clients in the U.S. government, state, federal, local government space secure their Windows 10. And I said, well, have you ever come across anyone who actually did it the way Microsoft even recommends it? And they said, no, absolutely not. In fact, we haven't even seen anyone come close. And I don't just mean the Microsoft baseline analyzer, which I hope you do use, and I think it's still available for Windows 10. To do Windows 10 security right, especially if you're going to rely on, as I said before, Defender, it's very important to follow the Microsoft's recommended settings for, as I mentioned earlier, TPM security, the virtualization layer, device guard, credential guard. And the one that I'd also suggest you look into is, if you're not already doing application whitelisting, is the Microsoft WDAC. I am not a Microsoft salesman. I basically criticize the company more than I support them. But in this case, as I said, I talked to people at Microsoft, and they have a hard time getting people to actually use the tools that they provided in Windows 10, which honestly, the literature is hard to follow. They contradict themselves often. But if you find a good Microsoft technical rep or someone who understands Windows security well, you can go a long way in securing, again, without spending a lot of money, securing your Windows 10 environment. And the pieces I mentioned, the virtualization layer, Defender is fine if you make it part of the virtualization-based security. And the Windows, they call it WDAC. I think it's called WDAC, but it's basically their application control, which enable you to basically, in a sense, whitelist the applications running on the system. I worked with a company, a large company, last month, 2 months ago, who was affected by ransomware and did pay the fee and got the keys. But they thought they were doing a good job with their Windows security. The one part they missed, and they were running Defender, but the one part they missed was not basically whitelisting their applications. So they got an executable running. It was actually a spoof DLL that was allowed to run. That wasn't signed, but they weren't checking for signed applications, so it was allowed to run. And all bets were lost. They were able to do the exploit. The last one I want to talk about, and this is kind of more of a general topic, but I'll give it some detail as well, is while most companies focus on protecting systems and applications, some do it better than others, very few actually protect data. They don't think of data like they consider systems. The data belongs to the enterprise, belongs to the business. They're responsible for the systems. That's a foolhardy approach to cybersecurity. You're responsible in cybersecurity for the systems and the data. It's crucial that you work together with, if you have a chief data officer, or at least with the business elements, to understand where your data is at. Which data is considered the most sensitive? Where is it hosted at? Where is it used? Most people look at it from an applications perspective or a systems perspective, but you really have to look at it from a more sophisticated and deeper level to understand the data itself. And the companies who really have good, and as I said, there aren't a whole lot, but who are doing a good job in categorizing, classifying, and securing their data. And I know DRM is hard and DOP is harder. But the companies who are actually paying attention and doing security at the data layer, and that includes data segmentation, isolation, DRM policies, classification policies, do have better security in general. You know, they have fewer incidents, they lose less data, and they are inherently more secure. So don't just think of yourselves as protectors of systems and applications and network and monitoring and SOCs. If you're not considering the data aspect of cybersecurity, trust me, you're not doing the full job. Okay, so we wanted to leave some time for questions, and let me turn it back over to Kara to see if we have any. Kara?
Yes, hello. So just a reminder, everyone, if you do have a question, we're over in the chat box on the event portal. So we do have one question, Bob. Do you see corporations now involving chief data officers or chief privacy officers in their authorization, or are CISO functions mostly solely responsible for deconflicting cyber, data, and privacy issues during private sector authorization decisions?
So I don't see it work this way, but here's how I suggest it be done. That's where governance comes in, right? So as part of your governance function, not only do you have I should have mentioned this, not only should have the IT person and your business, but you have your data officer there as well. And while CISO has responsibility for cybersecurity, I don't believe they are responsible for data security and how data is protected and who gets access to data. They have a responsibility implementing data security controls, like the ones I just mentioned, but it's really the chief data officer who has to tell you what those controls and responsibilities are, and that's what it means to be a chief data officer. They're the ones who make the determination on data access and data use, and they do that best when they work through a well-managed, well-documented governance function with the CISO and the CIO.
Great. So have you seen any specific threats that have been on the rise with your clients amid COVID-19?
Well, yeah, so supposedly the answer is no. The media, and you have to watch what the media does. They get a little, excited with themselves, and vendors. Yes, there's been some increase in exploits on home PCs being used to use them as targets to basically exploit corporate networks. Here's what I have seen, and you don't hear a whole lot about this. What we do know is the Russian groups are specifically trying to connect through social engineering, like LinkedIn, trying to find who is allowing their admins, domain admins, root owners of Linux boxes, people with privileges, working from home on home PCs and doing those privilege functions over that network connection to the corporate network. They are specifically looking for those, and that is a function of COVID. The second thing we've seen is where before people who administered like DBAs, corporate networks, specifically funds transfer networks, and only used to do it from internal directly connected workstations, right? They now work at home. So they're doing their DBA functions from home, sometimes on their home PCs, God forbid. And those are also a target. So the Russians have pulled out their SQL injection attacks, and we have seen a somewhat, but not dramatic yet, rise in attacks using SQL injection. And they're finding those connections off of home PCs used by DBAs. And by the way, you know how they find them, right? They just do a LinkedIn, because every one of their people who are administrators love to tout their responsibilities and their levels of access. So it's very easy. You can pull these people up, and then you can drop some malware on their laptop. You can take control, and now you can run a man-in-the-middle attack and just do an SQL injection attack. There is one that I know existed about couple months ago. And people tell me that they've been seeing this elsewhere as well. So yes, there have been some. Total amount of increase, not as much as I think the press and vendors are telling you.
We had a comment when you were speaking about ransomware, how ransomware can be just as devastating when run in a user context rather than in a privileged context.
Yeah, and the way they do this basically is, although the users are unprivileged, they'll use a privileged process. For example, in one example I saw, they actually used a peer-to-peer network, and the peer-to-peer application that runs in the client is running with privileges. So they're able to use the peer-to-peer communications software to basically spread the malware, in this case the ransomware, across multiple, not all of them, but about 65% of the clients and a solid percentage of the servers, and then basically run the exploit because they were able to use the privileges of the P2P capability to run the exploit across a larger population than the workstation they landed on. So it can be done. It's a lot harder. And by the way, it's easier to detect when they're doing that, although they weren't monitoring their P2P. In fact, the company didn't even know they had a P2P application on their network.
If anyone does have a further question, please, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat box even after we close out of this Zoom. And Bob will also be available if you did want to message him privately. But Bob, is there any closing remarks or thoughts that you would like to leave for the attendees?
Yeah, well, everyone loves to deal with sexy technology, security technology as the solution to all our problems. I suggest, as I said before, I started with the first three: governance, charter governance, and policy-driven security for a reason. They are every bit as important, if not more important, than the technology you buy or use or even configure on inherently in your workstation, in your networks. So I would make sure that as part of what your security program does, you focus on those first three, and you'll find a much improved cybersecurity program.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bob. That was a really fabulous way to kick off this event. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our first session. We will see you in the next. And again, as I had said, Bob is around in the event portal if you did want to converse with him on over on the chat box. So thank you again, Bob, so much, and we'll see you all in the next session.